We're recording. Okay, so we're gonna start recording. Okay, so welcome everyone. Good morning, Judith. Good afternoon, or good early morning to everyone else, wherever you're from. Thank you for being on here today and for taking part in this really important and sometimes challenging conversation about the new world that we're living in and what it means to be a Jewish feminist in the new world, and how we take action and how we readjust ourselves and reconfigure ourselves to the world we're living in. So good morning, Judith, Dr. Judith Rosenbaum, the Executive Director of Jewish Women's Archive. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. How are you, first of all?
Well, I'm coming off of some vacation time and visiting with some friends. So that was nourishing and energizing, and I'm getting ready to return to work, which also is energizing in its own way. So I'm doing pretty well. And while I was away, it was very warm here and all the snow melted. So that's happy. That's happy. As someone who does not like winter, that is always a positive thing. I spent much of yesterday outside with just in a t-shirt. So that made me happy.
Okay.
And we gotta hold on to the small things these days.
Small things, right. So, and how are you generally with world events? How are you doing?
So I will say this has been a really hard and strange several months, and it's very hard to even know how to answer that question because I still feel like I'm sort of disoriented. I was saying to you right before we started that, there's a sense of, on the one hand, feeling like every day something new is happening that feels urgent and scary, and feeling like there should be some way to respond immediately. And on the other hand, recognizing that this, the next several years we really need, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I and everyone else needs to kind of get their bearings and figure out what are going to be the best ways to respond, how to organize, how both to figure out how to work together in productive ways and what are the most important things to be doing. And then also how to do it in a sustainable way, how to sustain ourselves as human beings who also need to lead their lives. I think of this also, I'm a parent of 2 10-year-olds, and so they're aware of the world and they also are kids. And so it's figuring out how to both talk to them about everything that's going on and how not to scare them. And that's hard when I think my husband and I both feel pretty scared. So, there's a lot of questions around both what to be doing to be productive citizens of this world and also how to live a normal life at a time when a lot of things don't feel normal. So it's pretty disorienting. It's hard to even know how to answer the question, I guess is why I'm rambling.
No, you're not rambling, and it's disorienting. I think that's the message. It's disorienting. Do you feel like you've changed since the election? You've shifted have you changed? Have you shifted anything in the way you approach life?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's teaching me some degree of patience. I'm trying to, which has always been a struggle for me. I'm trying to really be kind to myself and recognize that it's okay to not know how to respond in any given moment, that it's going to take some time to figure out, and that we need to not berate ourselves on the things that are confusing or hard. I feel very grateful because I feel like my work is actually very relevant and as urgent as ever in this moment. And I'm very grateful for that because I feel like that gives me a clear structure every day to feel like I'm doing something that is helpful and responsive and that feels very relevant. And I don't know what I would do if I didn't feel that kind of daily relevance in my work. I think it would make it much harder to know how to face this new reality. So I'm very, very grateful to feel like there were already structures in place for me to feel like I had avenues for responding. I will say one of the things that's been, I think, maybe the biggest irony for me in terms of ways that I've changed in the last few months. I've always been somebody who was kind of a constant consumer of information, always listening to the news all the time, reading all the time, online, on social media all the time. And I've actually really had to pull back. And that's been a really tricky thing to figure out, I want to be engaged in the world. I want to know what's going on. And I also need to sleep. And those two things feel like they are in conflict more than ever. So I've actually pulled back from some of the ways that I'm usually kind of out there, both consuming and putting messages out into the world, because I just need to create some boundaries and some quiet for myself so that I can, catch my breath and sleep.
So that's really interesting. Like, on the one hand, there's this sense of needing to be more engaged, and at the same time, more attention to self-care and moments of retreat that you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's both. In other words, both at the same time. At the one hand, get out there more, and remember to stay back more also, and protect yourself a little bit. Yeah.
Right. And like, we've always had very political conversations at my dinner table, and we've had to start having occasionally just saying, this is a Trump-free dinner, or, this is a Trump-free zone at this gathering or this meal, because otherwise it just kind of takes over everything. And there need to be moments when we can escape from that a little bit. But I also recognize that being able to do that is a privilege. So I feel like it's important to articulate that as well.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what JWA is doing, like how JWA is taking a role in politics or in?
Sure. So first, maybe let me just say a little bit about the Jewish Women's Archive in general, because people may not be familiar. We are a digital archive that is devoted to sharing Jewish women's stories and elevating their voices, and using the stories of Jewish women to inspire people to be agents of change in the world. So really thinking about how do we make sure that the stories that we tell about the Jewish people reflect an inclusive, reflect the voices of many different kinds of Jews, people of all genders and people of all backgrounds, and how do we create a really inclusive narrative about the Jewish people. And so that means both telling the stories of Jewish women from the past, but also really kind of reframing the way people think about the past. I mean, on the one hand, theoretically, Jews understand the importance of history and heritage. And yet I still think many people have a kind of sense that, okay, history is important, sure, someone should document it, but it doesn't really have anything to have an impact on our daily life. It's not necessarily relevant to our daily life. And our vision of history is really that it actually plays an important role, a really significant role, sometimes an invisible role, in shaping how we understand ourselves and our communities and how change happens in the world. And if we don't have a sense of history that offers models, both models of success and failure, that speak to us and that speak to our own experience, or that challenge our sense of how things are, that we're not able to really own our own power as historical actors and make change in the world. So that message feels extremely relevant in this moment. And we've been doing this for more than 20 years, both through our website and through public programs, and now a podcast. And we have many different ways of both documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories, also a lot of curricular materials to change the way that Jewish history is taught. So in some ways, what's really nice is that what we've always done feels just like what we need to be doing right now, which is sharing stories of people who have looked at the world around them and tried to think about how they can make a difference. And so some of what we're doing is really what we've always been doing, but maybe with a little bit more of a framing around contemporary issues. So for example, on social media, we have been posting weekly portraits of resistance, where we just tell stories of women who are already on our site and just say, oh, this week we're thinking about immigration. Well, here's a story of somebody who helped refugees. Here's a story of someone who saved Jews in Eastern Europe. Here's the story of someone who took a risk for a neighbor. Here's a story of somebody who came into a field where there were no women or were no Jews and made a space for other kinds of people to have leadership. So those kinds of stories, I think, are particularly important right now, and they actually don't need a lot of framing because it's pretty clear how they're relevant. We also have been using our podcast, which is a relatively new venue for us. We launched our podcast about a year ago. It's a monthly podcast called Can We Talk? And we use it to engage in conversations and stories around issues that are of interest to Jews and women around the world, from Jewish hair to immigration stories and how food reflects immigration patterns, to stories of activists in second wave feminism. So since the election, it's really become a very powerful platform for us to be able to include different voices. For the first episode after the election, we actually threw out what we'd been working on because it no longer felt particularly relevant. It felt sort of frivolous. And instead, we told the story of Emma Lazarus and the way that she really reframed the meaning of the Statue of Liberty as the mother of exiles instead of as a symbol of friendship between France and America, and particularly drew on her, one of my favorite quotations of hers, which is actually not from the sonnet on the Statue of Liberty, but from a piece she wrote called Epistle to the Hebrews, where she said, "Until we are all free, we are none of us free," and thinking about what does that kind of collective responsibility look like in this moment, and what is our responsibility as Jews to think about these issues of immigration and welcoming the stranger.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. It's really interesting that you're framing everything around stories. Actually, this election, stories became a really powerful medium for women, especially like around things like Pantsuit Nation, which is all stories, which, you know, became 4 million people strong, or even more by now. And it's all that. It's all about telling the stories. So that's a really interesting strategy, a really powerful strategy that you guys have been using for a long time already.
Yeah, and also we've been trying to collect stories. So we launched a new initiative called JWA Megaphone. We have a forum online where people can submit text, audio, video, and images of ways that they're responding to this particular moment. We put out 2 questions basically, which is, what story will you tell about this moment, and who are you inspired by? And we've gotten all kinds of responses from people of all ages around what they're thinking about and what they're responding to and what is catching their attention in this moment. We've got a lot of pictures of people at women's marches and at immigration marches after the first executive order on immigration. And, you know, there are certainly, as Jewish women have been always, Jewish women are really active in this moment in terms of responding. And so we want to make sure that we're documenting that so that, you know, people in the future will be able to look back and say, oh, these are some of the ways that Jewish women were responding.
That's fantastic. Maybe afterwards, hang on, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I was, maybe afterwards you'll share that link with us.
Absolutely.
Okay, that'll be fantastic. And so you went to the Women's March with your daughter, yeah? You shared that on Facebook. That was really fantastic. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, it was a really powerful experience. My daughter's 10, and she's kind of a burgeoning activist, and so I felt like, you know, even though there were a lot of questions around, well, you know, what is this march going to be like, and will it be safe, and is it inclusive, and what is really the, you know, how productive is a march? I felt like it was really important for her to see that there are a lot of people who care about what's going on and who want to stand up. And I've always found that to be part of these kinds of experiences is very energizing, because you recognize that you're not alone and that it's an opportunity to build community. And also just to show up as Jews, I felt was really important. So JWA actually participated in some wonderful Shabbat programming around the march at 6th and I Synagogue. And that was lovely in that it created this kind of Shabbat context for the march. And then we went out and joined the bigger march. And I've been to a lot of marches in Washington. This, to me, was the biggest one I've ever been part of. It was also the most peaceful and joyful. And there were so many different kinds of people and so much humor. It was really a good humored experience. And I think so many people felt like after months of feeling really just, you know, disoriented and upset, to be able to come together in a way that felt positive was incredibly energizing. Now, the first week of the administration was also incredibly hard. And so I think I expected to be able to hold on to those good feelings a little bit longer, but it was really amazing to, you know, kind of teach my daughter about what it was like to just be part of something and to meet different kinds of people. And we actually also did a podcast at the march. We interviewed people, and my podcast producer interviewed my daughter and her daughter, who was also there. and they talked about their experience. And then we actually framed the story of the march in the context of the first Women's March on Washington, which was in 1913, right around, it was actually the day before Wilson's inauguration. And that I felt like was an important kind of framework to put on there too, because of course those women were protesting Wilson's lack of attention to the question of women's suffrage. And I think it's a powerful model because it was a really long struggle. It was a struggle in which they made some serious mistakes. That march was marred by the fact that in order to keep Southern delegations in the Women's March, they put African Americans in the back. So it was it's an important moment to learn from, and also an important moment to remember. That was in 1913, and the 19th Amendment wasn't ratified until 1920. And so just to kind of have that long, I think part of what history can provide us is a sense that it takes a long time to make change, but you do get there. And I think in this moment, that's an important thing to remember, so we don't get too discouraged in the immediate moment.
So I have a couple questions about that. So first of all, you said that you felt that it was really important to have a Jewish representation there, that you sort of felt like being there as a Jew was important. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I felt like it was very important, given, for two reasons. Given that there are people who are allied with anti-Semites who are part of the administration, I feel like it's very important to represent as a Jewish community that we see that, and we are not going to allow that to be swept under the rug. But there are also prominent Jews who are part of the administration. And, I think that there is tension around, in the American Jewish community now, around, we've achieved as an American Jewish community a certain amount of power, and some people don't want to risk that power and don't want to, sort of are assuming that that power may help protect us. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's ever been true. In fact, the weekend of the march, the Torah portion was about Joseph, and he, as Rabbi Jill Jacobs pointed out in a drash that morning, he's the first person who teaches us that access to power has never protected Jews. So I think it's really important for the Jewish community to stand up and say, even if we, do have Jared Kushner as a advisor to this administration, he doesn't represent the bulk of American Jews, and we will not be bought in that way.
In general, this administration has a very strange relationship with Jews, because there is Jared and Ivanka, and then there's Steve Bannon. So how do we make sense of that? How do you make sense of that?
I am not able to make sense of that. It seems like a complete cognitive dissonance to me. The only thing that I can understand is that there are people who believe that, you have to be pragmatic and hope that your own access to power will protect you. I don't think historically that's been the case. I mean, I also felt as a white Jew that it was particularly important to show up as a white Jewish woman, because, the stats that have been revealed that more than 50% of white women voted for Trump. And I think it's really important for white Jewish women to stand up and say, we are not part of that. We don't want to be represented by that stat, that we want to make different kinds of coalitions, and we understand our own role in history differently and our own power differently. And I think, to me, really the biggest learning of this whole experience and of the march, but of the whole period since the election, is really about the importance of coalitions, the importance of standing in solidarity with people. And I think that Jewish women have a particular role that we can play as representatives of two communities that I think are threatened by the Trump administration, or potentially threatened by the Trump administration, to be able to speak out in that way and to try to make common cause with other people.
That's been challenging at moments? For instance, Linda Sarsour getting up there and talking about talking about putting Palestinian rights up front and center. For some Jews, that was great, and for other Jews, that was alienating. So how did you feel about that?
I think that that's what coalitions look like. It means that you figure out how to work with people who you're not going to agree with on every single topic, and you start with that assumption, and you don't ask people to toe a particular line in order to enter into conversation with them. There's so much talk about intersectionality right now, and I actually think that in some ways intersectionality has been a little bit misunderstood by some people. Like there's an assumption that it means that, well, we understand that people hold many different identities and that those identities can be in conflict, and that they make politics complicated, they make identity politics complicated, but that we can't really understand either politics or identity without acknowledging that it's multiple. And for some people that has somehow morphed into some sense that you need to, if you believe in one thing, if you support one group, then you also need to support this other issue. And if not, then you're somehow not intersectional, that you're not accepting intersectional politics. But that's not what intersectionality means. What it means is that you acknowledge that sometimes someone can contain contradictions in their identity, and it can be very confusing. And in fact, having that difficult conversation does not mean, or coming into conflict with another person who you might be in solidarity with on one issue but disagree with on another issue, that's not a failure of intersectionality. That is intersectionality. That's what it's about, is that discomfort and figuring out how you stand in the discomfort and you have the conversation and you figure out how to work together in ways that feel productive.
That was particularly,
it's not easy, but I think that it's the only way that, otherwise what happens is that, the progressive movements undermine themselves and kind of shoot themselves in the foot and then can't.
Okay, Gadi, פשוט קל לעלות על טלפון.
Is that Naamah? Naamah, is that you?
Oh. She's almost here. Hold on. Okay.
Naamah?
Okay. Hi! Can you see me?
I cannot see it. Hang on.
Hi, Nami. How are you?
Why? Oh, that's why. Judith!
Hello!
Where'd you go?
Hang on.
I can see you.
Judith, can you see Naamah?
I can see Nami.
Okay, I can't.
Just go. Where'd you just go? We're launching. Oh, launching. My sister's here. She's going to be a double. I don't know if okay.
Okay. So first of all, welcome.
I have my agent and my lawyer here. Wait, I can't see anybody. Where'd you went? I'm still try refreshing it. Refreshing. Let's see here.
Okay. Meanwhile, I want to ask you, you just came in at a really interesting moment because Judith was just talking about the complexities of women's alliances and what it means for women to be allied with other women who have different perspectives. You can't see us? Hang on.
I saw you for a second.
Hang on.
You disappeared. Should I get off and try again?
No, stay on because you're on. We see you.
See you.
You should have buttons. If you scroll over the bottom of your screen, you should see some buttons that should help you change your view.
Jill just wrote me a lovely. Okay. All right.
Welcome. Okay.
All right.
So welcome. So, and welcome to your sister. What's your sister's name?
My sister's name is Abby.
Hi, Abby. So welcome. So we were just talking about, Judith was talking about the Women's March, and we started talking about the complexities also of anti-Semitism and trying to understand that. And then I asked a question about Linda Sarsour, how that feels, and Judith gave a really fantastic answer, which is about women's alliances and what it means to be allied with people that you don't agree with on everything, and how that's part of what we're supposed to be doing. And I was about to ask her about the context in Israel, because at the Women's March here in Israel, there was controversy about that, of course. Of course there was, because what does it mean to be progressive-minded Israeli Jews? And what does that mean to vis-a-vis the Palestinian conflict and vis-a-vis Palestinian feminists? And where are those alliances? And how do you do that? And there were some protesters at the Women's March in Tel Aviv. While you were having a Women's March in Washington and we were doing it in Tel Aviv, there were protesters about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And, so there was an article on the forward which said, oh, you see, to be progressive means that you have to have the most extreme left view on Israel. And then Rachel Kamar, who was one of the organizers of the event, wrote a really beautiful article in the forward, which is very much aligned with what Judith was just saying about what does it mean to build alliances among women when we have different positions, and how do you contain that? And isn't that what we're supposed to be trying to do, is to contain different voices? That's where you came in, Naamah. So welcome. So would you like to offer us your perspective on all of this? Well, first of all,
softball first question, right?
What?
Softball first question.
We've started? People are listening? This is
Yes,
being recorded? Okay. Hi, everybody. Erev Tov from Jerusalem. Okay, and good morning, good afternoon, or good morning, depending where people are in the United States.
We have both coasts represented.
Of course, Chodesh Tov, happy Purim, happy Adar, happy Purim coming up. The festival about women's empowerment, ? Exclamation point. Look, I think the truth is I'm somewhat of a bystander in the sense that the whole question of intersectionality has hit, American Jews, lefties, LGBTQ, very hard for a while now. And my sense is actually, with the Trump election, I think it's been a different kind of wake-up call. And again, I apologize. I'm just a reader of this, a bystander. Yes, we had a little incident in Israel when, in support of the Women's March, the Democrats abroad would not participate in that, from what I understood, because they sensed it was going to turn into an end the occupation rally, which it didn't, but instead of what I think everyone hoped it would be, and I know in Washington there were sensitivities, but it pretty much ended up to be a huge rallying cry for empowerment, for fighting discrimination. One or two people in Washington did call out the Palestinian issue. I don't think it, did it break down all the coalitions? No. I'd like to think that we are going to be, this new era is going to force us to talk to people we don't necessarily agree with on everything. It's painful that Israel becomes such a lightning rod for so many of these things, that those of us who love Israel but are very critical have to, I feel like everything's been flipped. So it's, I think you can be progressive and you can be critical of Israel. I think you can be progressive today and support Black Lives Matter. I think you can. Doesn't mean that you're going to agree on everything. Having said all that, I'll just add one more thing. And again, I'm a bystander. Judith knows. From what I see, from Facebook, from some of the Facebook groups I'm on, the whole conversation has gotten so extreme. Jews can't talk to each other. What I hear, what a rabbi can or cannot preach in a synagogue, or if he or she does, the kind of pushback they're getting. You can't talk about immigration anymore. You can't talk about safe refuge. You can't make any, anyway, so.
Yeah, I think that politics of this moment are going to challenge that. I think it's a real opportunity to open that up because, I think about this a lot also as the head of a nonprofit organization, right? That's pretty diverse in terms of its supporters. Do I have supporters who have voted for Trump? I probably do. I'm sure I do. I know I do. On the other hand, this is not the moment to be safe and try to please everybody because we know that doesn't work. This is a moment, this isn't about my candidate winning or losing, right? This isn't a moment where my sense of fear or anger is about that the person that I voted for didn't win. This is a whole different kettle of fish. This is something unprecedented, something we haven't seen before in American politics. So it's not just about taking, you know, I'm the head of a 501c3. I can't take advocacy positions, but that doesn't mean I can't speak out about moral issues. And in fact, you know, am I going to piss people off? Have I already pissed people off by things JWA has done in the last few months? I know I have. I've gotten some angry emails, but I've gotten a lot more emails of people saying, I'm so glad to see Jewish women standing up for some of these things. And so, you know, I think the issue right now, we're in a moment where and I think this is generally true, but more so than ever, if you're not making some people angry, then you're not doing anything that's at all useful. And to me, a kind of metaphor of this was actually from the Women's March. So the Women's March in Washington, which I was at, was so enormous that even though we got there relatively early, we were so far from where the stage was, we couldn't hear anything. And in fact, there was basically no marching that happened because the entire route was filled with people. So I actually couldn't hear any of the speakers. I watched them afterwards on YouTube. But during the march, at which I stood for many hours, I couldn't hear any of the speakers. But that actually was fine, because in the end, it wasn't about what the different speakers said. You know, I'm really appreciative that various celebrities got up and made a statement, but what they have to say isn't necessarily the most important thing. What was important was being in the crowd and talking to lots of other people and having my daughter talk to other people and hearing these kinds of conversations. As I said, JWA did a podcast on the march. We interviewed people from all different places and all different backgrounds of all different ages. And being part of that conversation to me was really what the march was about, not about who stood on the platform and made what, you know, bland or incendiary statements.
Judith,
so those of us who watched,
oh, sorry.
No, just saying, I watched it live stream. I saw every single speech for hours.
Right.
In the comfort of my own living room, whatever. Some of them were quite amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed watching them afterwards. It was quite amazing. But I was actually, at first I was disappointed we couldn't hear, and then in the end I felt like my experience was better because I couldn't hear. And that the real experience was the kind of grassroots of just all these people of all different backgrounds and genders standing there.
Do you agree, Judith, that when Naamah says, oh, we're just bystanders, do you consider feminists in Israel to be bystanders? Do you agree with that assessment?
I mean, I think to some degree. I mean, when you're not on the ground in a particular place, it is a little bit different. On the other hand, I think that Trump is just, I mean, first of all, Trump is going to have a huge impact on Israel. And I think Jewish communities abroad and in Israel should be connected and are connected to one another. I also think that Trump is representative of a larger political thing that's happening all over the world. I think what's been so shocking to Americans is that we didn't think it could happen here in America, but we maybe shouldn't have been so surprised. I mean, American exceptionalism is, for some reason, always alive and well, even though we should have learned this lesson long ago. So, you know, in terms of taking that kind of global perspective, then we certainly all are in conversation with one another. On the other hand, there are specific kinds of contexts and conversations that happen in Israel that are different from what's happening in the US. So I think it's really important to have these kinds of conversations that are global. And I also think it's going to land differently for people living in different places and who are on the ground in different places. The same way that I follow very carefully what happens in Israel. And, you know, I am very connected to Israel and love Israel very much. I'm also relatively critical of many things that happen in Israel, but I try to spend a lot of time there so I can be on the ground there, because it's very different to follow it from the States, even though I follow very closely and I have friends and family in Israel who I'm in close touch with. But it is different to be on the ground somewhere.
Yeah, I want to clarify. I'm only a bystander on the particular issue about the Women's March you talked about in Washington. You know, had I been in America, I assume I would have shown up in New York, or, you know, for sure. But on that particular question, I think the Israeli feminism in some ways wouldn't exist without the love and support all these decades without American Jewish feminism. We're joined, you know, very much at the hip, even though it's different issues sometimes, but there's so much more that we share. And I really think whether it's, you know, a lot like us, Elana, you know, come here and been feminists, and we came out of that North American feminism, Jewish feminism, or Israelis who are now taking on feminism. So we're totally joined at the hip in many ways, and we desperately need each other. And I think Dafka, we in Israel can help some Americans understand what it's like, what it feels like often to be in the opposition. We have a little experience of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
And I also think that Israeli feminists can, it's easier in many ways to live in America on a lot of different issues. And Israeli feminists, I think, teach us, keep us honest around what are the real fights that we need to, Israeli people in general, and Israeli feminists maybe in particular, are active all the time, like need to be constantly kind of aware of what's going on and responsive. And I think Americans have a lot more leeway to kind of ignore things here and there. And I think that we get lazy because we think we can just kind of, retreat a little bit into our comfort, and we have not been forced to figure out how to really stick to our politics on the daily grind of it. And I think we learn a lot from Israelis about how to do that.
So I'd like to ask both of you, what are the most, we're being blitzed here on a zillion issues all at once from a zillion different directions. Also, and as Jewish, Zionistic feminists, also on a whole bunch of other issues as well. So what have you chosen to, or what do you think are the most important things to focus on? Both in terms of, where you put your attention, and also in terms of action, like action items as well.
So, as I said in the beginning, in some ways I feel like it may be a little too early to answer this. I'm also feeling like every day there's 5 new things to take action on, and it's totally overwhelming. And obviously we can't be active on everything. And it's going to take some discernment to figure out how to be kind of our most productive selves in that way. And I'm trying not to be overwhelmed by that, because it's also, we don't have the luxury of being overwhelmed, but we also need to take some time to figure out how best to respond. So I would say 2 things. One is, it's really important to me that the narrative around women and women's rights doesn't fall by the wayside. It was such a part of the conversation during the election, both because of Hillary Clinton's historic candidacy and because of Donald Trump's historic misogyny. And I actually feel like since the election, that narrative has kind of fallen down a little bit in terms of its explicit articulation. And that worries me, because I think that is often what happens, is that women, not that women haven't been at the forefront of responding to a lot of what Trump's been doing, but that somehow women's concerns get put on the back burner even as women are at the forefront. So it's very important to me to make sure that that doesn't happen. Even as I think it's really important for women to be working in coalition with other women and with other people on other issues. The issue of immigration is a huge one to me as a Jew and as a woman. I think it is clearly going to be one of the main things that's emerged so far in terms of Trump's action. I also was very distraught by his recent step on LGBT rights, particularly around protection of trans students. I think that is, I just, fundamentally, it's just a total move of supporting bullies. I just don't understand it at all. And so I think we really need to be careful on the LGBT front, because I think that it's very easy to target LGBT people. And although they have won many victories recently in American politics, I think that it's very precarious. So, and as someone who feels very connected to the LGBT community and has many friends and loved ones who are part of that community, I have a personal stake in it, but also just a political one. So, but I think it's very hard to know. We're still really in the early days, and this is a marathon, and it's going to be very hard to know what is going to be the kind of main issues to confront. And part of the issue is going to be figuring out how to work on multiple fronts at once, which again is why coalitions are going to be so important.
Yeah. So first of all, I think I just want to agree with Judith that I think it's so overwhelming. Every day you wake up and say, oh my God, it's like, whose house is burning today? I mean, or what's going on? And it's so much disruption. So, you know, if we're all feeling overwhelmed, it's overwhelming, particularly in the US. What I'd like to suggest is what I'll call the long view and the daily grind, okay? And here I have some historic perspective, and as I was thinking about some of the things I might say tonight, of course, Judith, I really wish your beloved mother, Professor Paula Hyman was around to get some real perspective. You know, if we go back to the 1970s when Jewish feminism is born, and I think about the incredible strides, I mean, despite the setbacks and despite our feelings of a terrible regression and backlash, I think the march really is the arc of justice keeps pushing forward. And nothing convinces me more than that, what I see going on in some corners, Elana, you may disagree, of Orthodox feminism. Some of the, you know, also trailblazers, courageous women who are trying to really get out there, expose the misogyny, the discrimination, the abuse, the harassment, the inequality.
I just want to say I don't disagree.
Okay.
I just want to put it out there that, you know, I have many Orthodox feminist friends who I consider heroes.
Right,
so
right.
I'm totally.
We all balance each other. Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And
anyway, yeah.
So I can even think back in 1975, I took at University of Pennsylvania, I took one of the first courses on, they didn't even call it no names for these things. I took a course on women and national liberation movements. And, you know, we were like 15 of us, and the two guys in the course were the Trotskyites, if you remember them. They're still on every campus. There are like two of them. And they didn't say a thing, I think, the entire course. Because, we didn't have a language for so much of this. But I remember one of the lessons that was very clear that our teacher, who unfortunately I don't even remember her name, talked about often in national liberation movements, women are totally on the forefront. We win the national liberation, and then they're stuffed back in the kitchen. That's true of Zionism. You know, I don't know how much of a myth it was that women were in the battlefield and, you know, arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder. And then the next we know they're having babies and back doing laundry and cook, you know, in state building, something. So there is a kind of historic swing that may be happening. And again, we need to take the long view. And if I look at the long view as we're ordaining more and more women from all the denominations and women. I see Lana's bookshelf. I can't keep up on my bookshelf and the amazing scholarship and poetry and ritual and ideas. I know Jill Zimmerman's on the phone. Yeah, I think of just incredible progress that has been made in some ways, which gives me a lot of comfort. I think one of the senses I had, even I'm older than you, was that I may not live to see the swing back. I mean, I'm not, you know, it's going to take time now. I mean, or it's going to, I hope I do, but we may be in a period of, so that's one thing. Having said that, I refuse to give up on the daily grind, which means we have to keep doing what we're doing. We have to train, we have to model, we have to teach, we have to, you know, make sure that every panel has women, every conference has women, you know, all the stuff we do. Make sure the women in our programs are, and the LGBTQ we just have to keep up, nonstop with the daily grind of what we believe in. And, you know, in Israel, the Zionists said dunam, or, you know, as each person, one by one, every woman we empower is as if we have empowered the entire world. And so, as I say, long view, daily grind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would also just say that I think the one good thing about this moment is it has activated a lot of people, and it's energizing people, and people understand now that, you know, we have to really step up and be responsive and, you know, keep up with the daily grind and have the long vision of the future, and that's going to be how we have to live. And some of us were already activists, but I think a lot more of us are going to be now. And I think it's also really important. I mean, I see this as a mom that, you know, and they say that people's political perspectives are really shaped by what happens in the kind of period between their teens and, you know, their 20s or whatever. And so I think there's a whole generation of young people who are going to be shaped by this moment and are going to be lifelong activists. And so they are going to be really important. And I look at what they're learning, and, you know, my daughter said to me after we went to the Women's March, the next weekend we went to the march against the executive order on immigration in Boston, and she said, so is this what we're going to be doing every weekend from now on? And I said, probably, yeah, seems like it pretty much. You know, she was like, oh, okay, you know, this is what the new pattern is. So I think that's going to be a good outcome of this. And part of it is keeping up that sense, you know, not allowing ourselves to feel too despairing, but to keep it more as a force for energizing.
Right. I think, and we cannot, you know, underestimate how not despairing is becoming a spiritual practice for many of us, to get up in the morning and say, you cannot despair. You have to we just have to believe this. I would, you know, it's going to take a lot of, we have to stay connected. We have to, I don't mean we have to stay in our bubbles, but we need to find strength in one another and support one another across the world, across organizations. That's how we're going to keep our resilience. We really need to take care of ourselves in this period of not despairing and finding resilience. And you didn't hear, I thought, actually, I understand she's under investigation now, but Madonna gave such an incredible talk at the rally. And she said, this is the greatest wake-up call. Where have we been? We've been sleeping. You know, and to hear Madonna say something like this.
And I think that's also part of what we can learn from feminists around the world. I mean, I think it's a really important piece of the story is that, you know, maybe American feminists were sleeping, but I think there have been feminists active around the world in really amazing ways. And this is an opportunity to lift up their voices and really learn from them, and have some humility in the West about what we can learn from women around the world. And yeah, I mean, I think also there's a question of like what Judaism can teach us around that spiritual practice of not despairing. I think that actually as Jewish feminists, we have a lot of wisdom to draw on there. I've never been so grateful for Shabbat as I have been in the last few months. I mean, I've really just utterly collapsed on Shabbat and just lay around with my friends, you know, just really just holding on to my friends and family for dear life.
Absolutely.
And also, I mean, do you think that I mean, you both sort of alluded to this, but do you think that there is a particular Jewish feminist stance vis-a-vis all that's going on? Is there a particular, something about being a Jewish feminist that gives us a unique approach, a unique perspective, or to all of this? You both sort of said it a little bit.
You know, I don't think there's one thing that I think Jewish feminism is quite diverse. I don't think we can boil it down to one kind of perspective or overriding orientation. What I think it does, I think this is a moment where, for me at least, I can at least really speak for myself, drawing on my own sense of myself and my history as a Jew and as a woman is particularly powerful. There's such important resonances of both of those pieces. And I think that Jewish women and Jewish feminists have always lived with a lot of contradiction and complicated politics. And so that's not new. That's not new for us. And we can draw on that in the kinds of work that we need to be doing going forward.
Yeah, exactly on that point of contradiction, you know, I think as Jewish feminism, we as Jews, I think we always have been concerned about our survival, and Jewish women feel that perhaps bear that responsibility more than others, maybe not fairly. So I think for many of us, that has always been part of being a Jewish feminist, that actually this is a way to ensure Jewish survival. by making women part of the conversation, the leadership structure, the, breaking into all the houses, the house of study, the Beit Midrash, the house of worship, the Beit Tfilah, the house, all that, breaking in and really, I think, rejuvenating it, regenerating it in many ways. I think when I look back at the 20th century, the two greatest Jewish movements have been Zionism and feminism, and both of them energized Judaism in ways that we're still both being excited by and reeling from. These are major Jewish social upheavals. So having said that, I think the unique brand of Jewish feminism is that we have a long history of arguing that we're good at. We have a long history of humor. We don't take, I think these things are, we get together with family members and scream and argue. And as Judith said, and the other thing, I think our Jewish calendar, whether it's Shabbat or Chagim, is a constant reminder of the ebbs and flows of throughout the Jewish centuries that have kept us going. I find tremendous solace in the Jewish calendar as well.
Yeah, Judith was talking about that at the beginning, about how we're living in a time of, on the one hand, there's a greater need for action and being even more involved than we were ever before. And at the same time, even more need for self-care and for remembering to retreat and to take moments to care for yourself. I think that's what Jill has that question down here. There are some beautiful comments, by the way, and really empowering and strengthening and inspiring comments. A lot of them revolve around that sisterhood thing, the idea of mutual support and how vital that is, especially with women you don't necessarily agree with on everything, but to remember that we all have to support each other because we're all in this fight together. And so Jill says, so what advice would you give us about how to carry on when every day is a new assault? Which gets back also to Naamah's point about the connection with spirituality and social activism together, that they're sort of mixed in, so how would you to take care of yourself sort of emotionally, spiritually? Jill, I'm maybe putting words in your mouth. I'm sorry, Jill, if I am. But anyway, I guess that's my question is, how do you care for yourself, especially your rabbinic perspective, Naamah? I think I'd be really interested also, is how do we care for ourselves while we're fighting that fight?
Yeah, I see Jill's asking, how do you live with trauma? I think in Israel, we live with trauma. We're always in either pre or post trauma here. I think, again, we have to ask ourselves, have we lived through worse times in our history? Yes. Have we lived in better times? Yes, it was actually quite recent. Maybe we were fooling ourselves, but we felt we were in the best of times. So I think it's, the great Ruth Bader Ginsburg said the American symbol should not be the bald eagle, but the pendulum. So, and I think of the symbol of the pendulum is also a kind of equilibrium. We have to do our best to find, everyone responds differently, but I know that even in the worst years of the Intifada, when it was pretty scary even to walk outside in Jerusalem, that many of us kept our equilibrium by, again, living our daily lives, embracing our family, friends, celebrating who we are, our life cycle events. Again, not letting the other side get us, be who we are as much as we can. It's not easy. In the worst Intifada years, I was in a group of women that decided, it's also when the wine revolution began in Israel. So we would, every Thursday night, we'd go wine tasting. We didn't know what we were doing, but, and it was part of it became a kind of practice. They were terrible weeks, but we were going to go out Thursday night and drink wine and laugh together. And I met another friend who said that she was in a similar group, but they read Tehillim together. So I thought, wine? Tehillim? Which group would you rather be in? So So, Tehillim, wine. Yeah, I see. Anyway, so I think we have to be, yes, wine, l'chaim, everybody. Right, there's music. So I think, I really want to send I don't have any great, there's no magic bullet here. It's just literally trying to get through week by week, counting our blessings, and again, exactly. Remember, Rabbi Nachman also said, my father used to quote all the time, Gewalt, Jews, do not despair, meaning Gewalt, it is Gewalt, we can't deny it, but we cannot despair, and we just to keep doing what we're doing. And
I think, and Barbara Glickstein in the comments was also talking about, dance and art and food. And I think that those kinds of things are so important. And, there's a tendency, I think we have to think of self-care as being something that's sort of frivolous, or, it's also been commercialized and, and commodified in such a way that it's about going to the spa or whatever, but it's really about sustaining yourself. It's about sustenance, and it's about how do you keep yourself healthy and nourished and focused. And I think that as women, we've always known that no matter what's going on in the world, we put one foot in front of the other. We love our families. We feed our children. Those things never stop no matter what's happening. And so drawing on some of those kinds of skills, I think, is really important. And part of it also is that those give us opportunities. Those are political acts, like to live your life as a full human being is a political act of resistance. I also want to make a plug for counter narratives. And I recognize that this is in part, this is my orientation because of the work that I do at the Jewish Women's Archive, but I find it very comforting and healing and energizing to remember that the narratives that we're hearing in the media or put forward by, the president are one take of things, and that there are a lot of counter narratives around history and around what the world looks like, and to really immerse ourselves in those voices that are not necessarily getting a lot of play is another way to refresh and for me, both to calm myself and to energize myself. To remember that there have always been people who have figured out how to resist, and that we will learn from them, and that we can tell those stories. Storytelling also is an incredible act of resistance and building resilience. And so I think doing that is another way to both kind of heal ourselves and fortify ourselves for the work that needs to come.
We're up at the end of the hour, so I want to just give you each an opportunity to just have a final word before we have to say goodbye, and also any last comments that if you guys out there.
So again, I think within our own institutions, organizations. Can you hear me? We need to stretch ourselves as we can. Are we, as Judith said before, are we building coalitions with the, fellow travelers? Are we stretching us? I know that I keep challenging my staff and myself to think about who are the Israelis we're not talking to, we haven't been able to talk to as Reform, as feminist. Is there any way we can break through some of these barriers? We're trying. We've developed certain techniques. We have a program in our spiritual care work. We actually put out to spend a Shabbat of people who identify as right wing or left wing to get together, and we've developed a technique called the spiritual questionnaire, where people talk about all sorts of things, and it neutralizes at least some of the bigger conflicts, but it tells us how do we deal with trauma and hurt, and what language can we have to build bridges. And we're certainly doing that with the Palestinians. I feel there are other populations in Israel we are really trying to explore how do we get to them? How do we talk to? I will not give up. We may not talk very much, but trying to talk to others. And obviously Reform in Israel has, there's a lot of red flags for a lot of people, but I know with each programming like this, we gain all the time people who are in conversation with us. So I would urge us all to get a lot of strength and resilience from our our sister travelers. It's critical. And then stretch ourselves beyond to try and talk to others, to get out there, to reach out. It can be really surprising, how many people, even with often different political opinions, we agree on all sorts of other things. I've said for years, again, in the opposition, and here I talk about being in the reform opposition also, and the perhaps those who want to resolve our political conflict. Can we build in our institutions, can we build the community that will ultimately make peace with our Palestinian neighbors? Can we build those communities that will somehow coexist with the people on the other side? What is it in America that the fabric has come apart? How do we, and it's this terrifying thing is how fast it has seemed to come apart, or we weren't paying attention. And how do we slowly, and women are very good. Jill, you're there, knitting back the pieces, the fabric to on the smallest level, even on the smallest step. How can we knit back some of these frayed communities? And again, if in the end it's just that our lives will have meaning, I promise you we'll have echo out. There's this famous story, and with this I'll end, of, the town crier, the village prophet, who was just up there screaming the same thing week after week, and no one's listening. And finally, someone says, why do you keep crying if no one's listening? And the town crier prophet says, well, at least I have to listen. I have to hear myself. I need to hear myself say day after day, tzedek, all the stuff we know. We have to keep saying it, at least, and if only we hear it.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. That was a really powerful. Judith, do you want to say one last word before we go?
I'll just say briefly that I think in an American context, I think this is a moment where Jewish feminists can, I think Jewish feminism has become very narrowly defined around feminist issues within the Jewish community. And I think that this is a moment to say we will continue to work on those, but we also want to have a presence in the larger feminist community. And this is an opportunity for us to stand up and be active in that way. And I think sometimes Jewish women are afraid to because of the complicated politics around Israel, but I don't think we have a choice in this moment. We have to just, this is a moment to stand up and to really expand what Jewish feminism means, because it has always meant a lot of things. And right. I don't want to see it flattened. I think this is a moment for the richness of Jewish feminism to really blossom.
Fantastic. Really fantastic. Absolutely. Tov, thank you, everyone. Thanks for all those who were here. Thank you, Dr. Judith Rosenbaum and Rabbi Naamah Kelman. You're both so awesome and so inspiring.
You are too, Elana.
Thank you. Thank you for
Dr. Sztokman. Okay. Bye-bye.
Lots of love. Lots and lots of love and power. More power to all of you.
We're going to be in touch in the coming days. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.